The village square had learned the sound of silence. It lived in the space between footsteps, in the breath people held when royal banners fluttered overhead, in the way backs straightened and eyes dropped the moment the princess appeared. Silence was survival here. Silence meant you kept your home, your hands, your life. So when the slap cracked through the air, it felt like the world itself had shattered. Princess Aloan's palm struck the old woman's face with a sharp, merciless sound. Skin against skin, echoing off stone walls and startled hearts. The old woman staggered, her frail body folding to the ground as if the years had finally claimed her. A basket tumbled from her hands, spilling dried herbs, wilted flowers, and bits of root across the cobblestones. No one screamed. No one moved. The square froze in horror. Dozens of villagers locked in place like statues carved from fear. Mothers clutched their children. Merchants lowered their heads. Even the guards, trained not to feel, shifted uneasily, their hands tightening around spear shafts. Princess Aloan stood rigid, her chest rising and falling too fast, her fingers still curled from the strike. Silk sleeves shimmered in the sun, immaculate and untouched, as though cruelty itself had not just passed through them. "Watch where you walk," Aloan snapped, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Do you know who I am?" The old woman did not answer. She lay on her side, gray hair falling loose from its knot, cheek already blooming red where the slap had landed. For a terrifying moment, some thought she was dead. A ripple of dread passed through the crowd, because a corpse in the square meant punishment for everyone. Then the old woman moved. Slowly, deliberately. She pushed herself upright, trembling not from weakness but from effort. Dust clung to her skirts. One gnarled hand pressed against the stones as she rose. The other hovered near her face, not in pain but almost wonder. She lifted her eyes to the princess and smiled. It wasn't the smile of gratitude or fear. It wasn't bitter or broken. It was knowing. Princess Aloan faltered for half a breath. Just a heartbeat. The kind of pause no one ever noticed except those watching closely. "What are you smiling at?" Aloan demanded. The old woman didn't answer right away. She glanced around the square, at the villagers who would not meet her gaze, at the guards pretending not to see her, at the banners bearing the royal crest, gold thread gleaming like false sunlight. Then she spoke. "History," she said softly. "Returning." Her voice carried farther than it should have. It threaded through the square like smoke, settling into ears and memories. Several villagers stiffened. One old man crossed himself. A young woman dropped the loaf of bread she'd been holding, flour dusting the ground like ash. Aloan laughed, but the sound was thin. "You're mad," she said. "Get her out of my sight." She turned sharply, motioning to the guards. That was when the wind changed. A low, uneasy breeze swept through the square, tugging at cloaks and hair, rattling wooden stalls. The herbs on the ground rustled, releasing a bitter, earthy scent that made some villagers' eyes sting. The old woman rose fully to her feet. She did not look frail anymore. She stood straight, too straight for someone her age. Her shoulders squared beneath worn fabric, and her eyes, dark and steady, fixed on Aloan with a gaze that did not bow. "I remember this square," the woman said louder now. "Before the stones were replaced. Before the banners changed." Aloan spun back around. "Silence!" she shouted. "Guards!" 2 guards stepped forward at last, though unease was written across their faces. One reached for the woman's arm. As he did, her sleeve slipped. Just a little. Just enough. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a sudden illness, because etched into the pale skin of her wrist was a mark. Crescent flame. Burnt red, unmistakable, as if branded by destiny itself. The guard froze. So did the villagers. Everyone in the square knew that mark. It appeared in tapestries, in ancient coins, in the stories whispered to children before sleep. The royal birthmark, proof of the bloodline chosen to rule. Slowly, without meaning to, dozens of eyes shifted to Princess Aloan's wrist. The princess noticed. Her breath hitched. Her hand instinctively pulled back toward her body, silk sliding too late. The same crescent flame glowed against her skin. The square erupted, not into screams but into gasps, sobs, and stunned whispers. "No," someone murmured. "It can't be. I saw that mark once before." The old woman gently pulled her arm free from the guard's grasp. No one stopped her. "I was crowned queen in this village," she said, her voice steady despite the blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. "Long before you learned how to walk." Eloan felt the world tilt. "That's a lie," she said, but her voice cracked. "My father stole the throne," the old woman finished, "and erased me." Silence crashed down harder than the slap had. The guards stepped back, uncertain now whom they served. The villagers stared openly, fear mixing with something far more dangerous, hope. Eloan's heart pounded violently in her chest. Her entire life had been built on certainty, that she was chosen, destined, superior, that the people beneath her feet were meant to kneel. But now, standing before her, was a woman who refused to kneel. An old woman with a queen's eyes. "You should not exist," Eloan whispered. The woman smiled again, sad this time. "Neither should lies," she said. Far above them, clouds slid over the sun, dimming the square. Shadows stretched long and thin across the stones, reaching toward the princess's feet like accusing fingers. The villagers began to murmur again, louder now, braver. And Princess Eloan realized, with a cold terror blooming in her chest, that the slap she'd delivered in anger had just awakened something far older than her crown, something that would not be silenced. The square did not return to life after the revelation. It held its breath. Princess Eloan stood frozen, her wrist burning as though the mark had only just appeared, as though it were reacting to the one exposed on the old woman's skin. For the first time in her life she felt naked, not without silk or jewels, but without certainty. The villagers were no longer looking at her the way they always had. Fear had ruled their faces before. Now there was calculation, memory. The old woman lowered her arm slowly, as if allowing the mark to fade from sight again would soften its impact. Didn't. Nothing could unmark what had already been seen. One of the guards cleared his throat. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "perhaps we should escort her away." The hesitation in his voice cut deeper than any insult. Eloan rounded on him. "You will do as you're told," she snapped. "This woman is a fraud, a beggar with a painted trick." The old woman laughed quietly, not mockingly, but with a sadness that pressed down on the square. "Paint washes away," she said. "This never did. Not even when they tried." "They?" Eloan demanded. The woman's gaze flicked briefly toward the castle towers rising above the rooftops, their windows dark and watchful. Those who feared truth more than blood. A shudder moved through the crowd. An elderly villager, bent, white-bearded, stepped forward despite himself. His voice trembled. "That mark," he said. "I've seen it once before. Long ago. On a queen who vanished." Gasps rippled outward. Eloan's stomach twisted. "Enough," she said, but the word lacked force. "Guards, take her to the cells." No one moved. The silence was different now. It was no longer submission. It was waiting. The old woman turned slowly, allowing the villagers to see her face fully. Lines etched deep by years of hardship traced her cheeks and brow, but beneath them was something unmistakable. Regal bone structure, proud eyes, a posture that hardship had not been able to break. "My name is Seraphina," she said, "daughter of King Aldrin, crowned queen of this land 23 years ago in this very square." The words struck like hammer blows. Eloan felt dizzy. 23 years ago. That was before her birth. Before everything she'd ever known. Lies didn't usually come with dates and places and witnesses. "Prove it," Eloan said, desperation creeping into her voice. Seraphina nodded once. "Gladly." She turned toward the crowd. "Bring the bell," she said. Murmurs erupted. "The bell," someone whispered. A woman near the well covered her mouth. "The coronation bell." That bell hasn't rung in decades, another said. It was sealed after I was declared dead, Serafina finished. Against all reason, the villagers moved. A group of men hurried toward the chapel at the edge of the square. The guards did not stop them. Eloan watched in disbelief as her authority slipped like sand through her fingers. Minutes stretched unbearably long. When the men returned, they carried a heavy iron bell between them, its surface dulled with age, its crest still faintly visible beneath grime. The old royal sigil, different from the one flown today. Serafina approached it. Eloan, she said, using the princess's name for the first time. You were never told this, but the bell was enchanted. It rings only for those of royal blood. True blood. Eloan laughed shakily. That's a myth. Ring it, Serafina said. The crowd pressed closer. Eloan's hands shook as she reached for the rope attached to the bell. She told herself this would end it. Expose the old woman. Restore order. She pulled. The bell remained silent. A murmur surged. Eloan swallowed and pulled harder. Nothing. Her heart pounded violently. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The square felt like it was closing in on her. Serafina stepped forward. May I? She asked. Eloan nodded without thinking. Serafina wrapped her fingers around the rope. Hands scarred, nails broken, wrists thin from years of labor. She pulled once. The bell rang. The sound was deep and resonant, rolling through the square like thunder, vibrating through stone and bone alike. Windows rattled. Birds took flight. Some villagers dropped to their knees as tears streamed freely down their faces. The bell rang again, and again. Each toll felt like a heartbeat returning to a body long thought dead. Eloan staggered backward. No, she whispered. This isn't possible. Serafina released the rope. The bell fell silent, but its echo lingered. I was poisoned, Serafina said, her voice carrying easily now. The night I refused to sign the land treaty. I survived, but barely. When I woke, my crown was gone. My guards were gone. My infant daughter was gone. The crowd erupted into shocked cries. Eloan felt something tear open inside her chest. Stop, she said. Stop lying. Serafina looked at her, really looked at her. You were taken so young you don't remember me, she said gently. They raised you to hate weakness, to strike first, to rule without mercy. Eloan's knees buckled. A guard caught her arm without thinking. Let her fall, someone muttered from the crowd. But Serafina shook her head. No, she is not my enemy. She is the proof. The square buzzed with voices now. Angry, confused, electrified. Where is the king? Someone shouted. Why were we lied to? Bring the records. Eloan's mind reeled. Memories she'd never questioned rose suddenly. How her father never allowed mirrors in certain halls. How portraits older than 20 years had been removed. How no one spoke of queens before him. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It bled in. Serafina stepped closer to Eloan, lowering her voice so only she could hear. I didn't come for revenge, she said. I came because the lie is rotting this kingdom from the inside. And because you deserve to know who you are. Tears welled in Eloan's eyes, hot and furious. I slapped you, she whispered. Yes, Serafina said. And in doing so, you struck the past awake. A horn sounded from the castle towers. Guards began to move, this time with urgency. The king knew. And the square, once a place of obedience, had become something far more dangerous. It had become a witness. Night fell like a verdict. Torches lined the streets leading from the square to the Hall of Records, their flames bending in the wind as if unsure which way the future would blow. The villagers followed in tense silence, drawn by equal parts fear and hunger for truth. No one had ordered them to come. No one needed to. Princess Eloan walked among them, no longer at the front, no longer surrounded by reverent space. Guards flanked her, but not protectively. Watchfully, Serafina walked ahead. Despite her age, despite the bruising on her face, she moved with purpose. each step heavy with memory. The iron doors of the Hall of Records loomed before them, sealed with wax and sigils that had not been broken in decades. An elder stepped forward, hands shaking as he pressed the royal seal into the lock. "By witness of the people," he said hoarsely, "we open what was closed." The doors groaned as they swung inward. Dust billowed into the torchlight, carrying the scent of parchment and decay. Inside, shelves stretched floor to ceiling, packed with scrolls bound in faded leather. Decrees. Bloodlines. The bones of history. Eloan's heart pounded painfully. She had been taught that history was clean, written by wise rulers, preserved by loyal scribes. She had never been taught how much it could rot. The elders moved quickly, knowing where to look. Their hands hovered over shelves marked with black ink, years scratched out, replaced. One muttered a prayer under his breath. "This section was sealed the year Queen Seraphina vanished," another whispered. Seraphina stopped in the center of the hall. "I was declared dead without a body," she said. "That should have been your first warning." Scrolls were unrolled one by one. The crowd leaned in as lanterns were brought closer. There it was, a proclamation stamped with the royal seal. Death of the queen by sudden illness. No witnesses listed. No burial location recorded. "That's impossible," Eloan said. "A queen's burial is public." Seraphina nodded. "Unless there is no queen to bury." More scrolls followed. A midnight decree transferring all authority to the king consort. A treaty signed days later, ceding farmland, mines, and forests to foreign powers. Documents that Eloan recognized. Policies she had been raised to defend. Her stomach churned. "Read this one," an elder said, voice trembling. It was a guard's testimony, written in a shaky hand, signed and then abruptly cut off. She was alive when they took her from the chambers. Gasps filled the hall. Eloan staggered backward, gripping a pillar for support. The stone was cold beneath her fingers. Seraphina closed her eyes. "They poisoned my wine," she said quietly. "Not enough to kill me, just enough to still my voice. I woke in a cart outside the city gates, stripped of crown and name." Her voice hardened. "When I tried to return, they branded me a traitor." A murmur of rage swept through the villagers. "They told us she fled," someone whispered. "That she abandoned us." Seraphina opened her eyes, and for the first time tears slipped free. "I tried to come back," she said. "Every year. But fear is a powerful wall. And lies are good guards." Eloan felt something inside her collapse. All her life, she had been taught that mercy was weakness, that rulers ruled by fear because fear was honest. Now she saw it differently. Fear had been used. A sudden clang echoed through the hall. The doors slammed shut. Gasps erupted. Guards spun, weapons raised. From the shadows at the far end of the hall, boots echoed. The king emerged. Eloan's father. He looked smaller than she remembered. His hair, once jet black, was threaded with gray. But his eyes, those were unchanged. Cold. Measuring. "Well," he said calmly, "you've made quite a mess." Eloan opened her mouth, but no words came. Seraphina turned to face him. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she said. The king smiled thinly. "I thought exile was kinder." "Liar!" someone shouted. The king raised a hand, and the guards at the doors hesitated. "People of the village," he said smoothly, "you are being manipulated by a bitter old woman and a moment of spectacle. History is not written by bells and birthmarks." Seraphina stepped forward. "No," she said. "It's written by survivors." The king's gaze flicked to Eloan. "My daughter," he said gently. "Come here." The tenderness in his voice twisted the knife deeper. Eloan shook her head. "Is it true?" she asked. Did you take me?" His expression hardened for just a fraction of a second. "I saved you," he said, "from a weak ruler who would have lost this kingdom." Seraphina laughed bitterly. "You poisoned me because I wouldn't sell our people." The king ignored her. "You were raised to rule," he told Eloan. To be strong. Look at them. He gestured at the villagers. They need fear. They need order. Eloan looked around. At faces lined with anger, grief, and awakening. No, she said softly. They needed truth. The king's jaw tightened. Guards, he said. This time no one moved. The hall was deathly quiet. A single guard stepped away from the king and removed his helmet. I was on watch the night the queen disappeared, he said. I was ordered to forget. More guards followed suit. The king's smile vanished. Seraphina stepped beside Eloan. Their shoulders touched. You erased me, Seraphina said. But you couldn't erase the blood. The king drew his sword. Steel sang as it left the sheath. If I fall, he snarled, this kingdom burns with me. The torches flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls like ghosts returning to claim their names. Eloan felt fear, but also something else. Resolve. She stepped forward. And for the first time in her life, she stood between power and the people. Not as a princess, but as a choice. The blade in the king's hand gleamed like a threat made solid. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The Hall of Records, once a sanctuary of ink and memory, felt suddenly fragile, as though a single wrong step could shatter centuries of truth all over again. Torches hissed and popped, their flames bending toward the steel as if afraid. Eloan stood frozen between two worlds. Behind her were the villagers, faces etched with fury, disbelief, and something dangerously close to hope. Beside her stood Seraphina, bruised yet unbowed, the weight of a stolen crown resting invisibly on her shoulders. And before her stood the man who had raised her, the man she had called father, sword drawn and eyes stripped of all pretense. You will step away from her, the king said, his voice low and commanding. Now, Eloan's heart thundered in her ears. Every lesson she had ever learned screamed at her to obey. Kings did not ask, daughters did not defy. But another voice, quieter, older, rose within her. The voice of truth finally heard. No, Eloan said. The word fell softly, but it struck like a blow. The king blinked, disbelief flickering across his face. What did you say? I said no, she repeated louder now. Her hands trembled, but she did not step back. You lied to me. You stole a throne. You stole a child. A murmur surged through the crowd. The king's lips curled. I made you powerful. You made me cruel, Eloan said. Her voice cracked. And I let you. Seraphina placed a gentle hand on Eloan's arm. You don't have to do this alone, she said. The king laughed, sharp and bitter. Listen to her, he sneered. The woman who would have let our enemies swallow this kingdom whole. That's a lie, an elder shouted. The records prove it. Records can be forged, the king snapped. Seraphina met his gaze. So can daughters. The words struck Eloan like ice water. The king raised his sword slightly. I will not be dethroned by parchment and sentiment. He lunged. Chaos exploded. A guard rushed forward, intercepting the blade with his spear. Steel rang out, echoing through the hall. Another guard grabbed the king's arm. Villagers shouted. Torches wavered violently, casting jagged shadows that made the walls seem alive. Seize him, someone yelled. The king twisted free, striking the guard across the face with the hilt of his sword. Blood spattered across ancient scrolls, staining truth with violence. Eloan screamed. Stop! Her voice cut through the din like a blade of its own. Everyone froze, even the king. For a moment, father and daughter locked eyes. You would turn them against me, he asked quietly. They were never yours, Eloan replied. Tears streamed down her face now, unashamed. You only ruled because they were afraid. The king's gaze flicked around the hall. He saw it then, the way the villagers stood closer together, the way the guards' stances had shifted, no longer protecting him but containing him. Fear had changed sides. The king exhaled slowly and straightened, composing himself as he always had. Very well, he said smoothly. Let us speak as rulers then. He lowered his sword just slightly. If I step down, he said, this kingdom will fracture. Nobles will rebel. Foreign powers will invade. You think they will kneel to an old woman with no army? Seraphina's eyes hardened. I never ruled by armies. And you lost your throne, the king shot back. I lost it because I trusted you, she said. I will not make that mistake again. The king turned back to Eloan. You are my legacy, he said. You carry my blood. Without me, you are nothing. Eloan wiped her tears with trembling fingers. Without you, she said, I might finally be something else. A heavy silence followed. Then slowly, one by one, the guards knelt. Not before the king, before the people. The sound of armor hitting stone echoed like a verdict. The king stared in disbelief. Get up, he ordered. No one obeyed. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, clutching her child. My husband died in the mines you sold, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You said it was necessary. Another villager followed. My land was taken. My brother was imprisoned. My son disappeared. The hall filled with voices. Years of suffering finally given sound. The king backed away, his confidence unraveling. You would tear this kingdom apart for her, he shouted. No, Seraphina said. For them. The guards closed in. The king raised his sword again. But this time Eloan stepped forward. Put it down, she said. His hand trembled. For a fleeting moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Then it vanished. He swung. The blade never reached her. Seraphina moved with shocking speed, shoving Eloan aside as the sword sliced through air where she had stood. A guard tackled the king from behind, slamming him into a table. Scrolls flew everywhere, centuries of lies and truths raining down like leaves. The king struggled, roaring in fury, but the guards overwhelmed him at last. Shackles were brought. His sword clattered uselessly to the floor. Silence fell again, this time heavy, final. The king was dragged to his knees. Eloan stared at him, chest heaving. Why? She whispered. Why not tell me? He looked up at her, eyes hollow now. Because you would have chosen them, he said. And I could not allow that. The words hurt more than any blade. The elders stepped forward. By witness of the people, one declared, the king is hereby stripped of crown and authority. The crown, once so heavy with power, was lifted from the king's head, and no one rushed to claim it. All eyes turned to Seraphina. She did not move. Instead, she looked at Eloan. The throne does not need another lie, she said. It needs reckoning. Eloan swallowed hard. What happens now? Seraphina's gaze swept the hall, the kneeling guards, the villagers who had finally stood. Now, she said, the blood that was turned against the crown must decide what it is worth. Outside, the bells of the city began to ring, not in celebration but in warning. The world was watching, and the kingdom would never be the same.
Dawn arrived without celebration. No trumpets sounded. No banners were raised. A pale, uncertain light crept over the rooftops, spilling into the streets as if afraid of what it might reveal. The bells that had rung through the night fell silent, leaving behind a city awake and uneasy, standing on the edge of something it could not yet name. The king sat in chains beneath the eastern tower. Once, no one would have dared place him there. Now guards stood watch with faces set in stone, their loyalty no longer borrowed from fear, but bound to witness.
He did not speak.
He did not shout. He stared straight ahead, as though the kingdom had already ceased to exist. In the great hall, the people gathered. Villagers, elders, soldiers, scribes. Those who had never been invited before now stood shoulder to shoulder beneath vaulted ceilings meant to dwarf them. The throne loomed at the far end, empty. Its gold gleamed dully, stripped of meaning. Princess Eloan stood at the center of it all. She had not slept. Her silk gown was gone, replaced by a plain dress borrowed from a servant who had once flinched at her footsteps. Her hands were bare, her hair unbound. For the first time, nothing marked her as royal, nothing except the way people watched her. With expectation, with anger, with curiosity, with judgment, Seraphina stood near the windows, where dawn light caught in her silvered hair. She looked smaller in the vastness of the hall, yet somehow unmovable, like stone that had survived fire. An elder stepped forward. "The people have spoken through action," he said. "The king is removed. The lie is broken." A murmur of agreement rolled through the hall. "All that remains," the elder continued, "is to decide who wears the crown." The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against the ribs. Slowly, dozens of eyes turned towards Seraphina. Some bowed their heads. Others waited. Seraphina felt the weight of it, the pull of memory, of what had been stolen, of what could be reclaimed. She had imagined this moment in darker nights than she could count, standing before the throne, hearing the people call her name. She took a step forward, then stopped. "No," she said. The word rippled through the hall in disbelief. Aloan turned sharply. "What?" Seraphina faced the crowd. "I did not survive exile to rule again," she said. "I survived to end what began with me." An elder frowned. "You are the rightful queen." "I was," Seraphina replied. "And look what that crown cost." She turned to Aloan. "You were raised in a palace built on lies," Seraphina said gently. "But you stood against them. You stood when it mattered." Aloan shook her head. "I don't deserve." "No," Seraphina interrupted softly. "You don't." The bluntness stunned the hall. "And neither did I," Seraphina continued. "The crown is not a reward. It is a burden, one you must earn." She stepped closer to Aloan. "You will not sit on that throne today." A gasp spread through the room. Aloan's throat tightened. "Then who will?" Seraphina turned back to the people. "No one," she said. "Not yet." Whispers broke out, confused and uneasy. "The kingdom must breathe before it kneels again," Seraphina said. "You have lived under commands for too long. Now you must remember how to choose." The elders exchanged uncertain looks. "And you," Seraphina said, turning to Aloan once more, "will walk among them." Aloan's breath caught. "You will work the fields you once taxed," Seraphina continued. "You will sleep in homes without guards. You will listen, truly listen, to those you once silenced." Murmurs surged, some approving, some angry, some doubtful. "For 1 year," Seraphina said, "no title, no protection, no crown." Aloan's hands clenched. "And if I fail?" she asked. Seraphina met her gaze. "Then the crown will never touch your head." The hall fell quiet. Aloan looked around, at the villagers whose fear she had once mistaken for respect, at the guards who had obeyed her without question, at the throne that suddenly looked less like power and more like a grave. She thought of the slap, the sound it had made, the moment everything began to unravel. "I will do it," she said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "I will live as they live," Aloan continued. "And if they decide I am unworthy, I will walk away." The people watched her closely. Then, slowly, a woman stepped forward, the same woman who had spoken of her husband in the mines. "If she is to walk among us," the woman said, "she walks without jewels." Aloan reached up and removed the ring from her finger, the royal seal, and placed it on the stone floor. Another voice rose. "Without servants." Aloan nodded. Another. "Without guards." She swallowed hard. "Agreed." Seraphina watched, something like pride flickering through her eyes. The elder raised his staff. "So it is witnessed," he declared. "The princess relinquishes her claim, to earn it anew." As the gathering dispersed, Aloan felt lighter and terrified. By noon, she stood at the city gates. A small bundle lay at her feet. Bread. A cloak. Nothing more. The crowd had thinned, but many still watched from a distance. No one bowed. No one cheered. Seraphina approached her quietly. "This will not be forgiveness," she said. "Some wounds never close." "I know," Aloan replied. Seraphina hesitated, then reached out, and pressed something into Aloan's palm. A pendant. Old. Worn. My mother's, Seraphina said, not as a symbol of royalty, as a reminder. Aloan closed her fingers around it. Will you stay? She asked. Seraphina smiled faintly. I was never meant to. And where will you go? Seraphina looked toward the forest beyond the road. Some stories don't belong on thrones. Aloan stepped forward and embraced her, awkward, unsure, but real. Seraphina stiffened, then returned it. Be better than us, she whispered. Aloan nodded, unable to speak. She turned and walked through the gates, barefoot. The city watched her go. By nightfall, rumors spread. Some said the old woman vanished into the woods, becoming a legend before sunset. Others claimed she was never fully human at all, that she was the kingdom's conscience, awakened by cruelty. As for Aloan, she was seen carrying water, working soil, listening, and the throne remained empty, waiting, because the slap that once echoed through the square did not end with punishment. It ended with a choice, and the village, shocked, awakened, forever changed, would never kneel the same way again.